Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hey everyone, it's Susan Kaufman. Good afternoon, and you are listening to Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts Audio. Today I'm welcoming our guest speaker, Shelley Haven. Shelley Haven is going to discuss a topic of huge, enormous interest to any child with ADHD or learning disabilities, and that is, how do you choose the right technology, the software, the device that'll specifically help your middle or high schooler with learning differences, with reading, with writing, with note-taking, and all the academic challenges that come along in these school years? Let me just clarify that Shelley's topic today is primarily reading, writing, and note-taking. She will touch upon some executive challenges, executive functioning challenges, organization, time management, but the primary topic today is learning differences, learning challenges, which, as most of you know, over half of ADHD children suffer from. She is a certified assistive technology professional. She specializes in matching students with technology appropriate to their needs in the San Francisco Bay Area, where she has a consulting business called Technology to Unlock Potential. And for more information and lots of great insights, please visit her website. It's www.techpotential.net. So thanks so much for joining us today, Shelley. We're grateful for your time.
Well, hi, welcome everybody. So I'm an AT consultant. I go throughout the whole San Francisco Bay Area and also actually California and sometimes elsewhere. So our topic for today is choosing the right technology support. So it's more about teaching you to fish rather than giving you a fish, so to speak. And let's first start talking about just technology in general. Technology is really just a fancy word for tools. When you think about what are tools, tools help us do things faster or for a longer period of time, greater intensity, more effectively, more accurately. We may use electronics or a digital technology, but when it comes down to it, it's really just about tools, all right? And tools represent capabilities. They are physical items and stuff, whether they're digital or not, but they really represent capabilities. So when you see, I like to use the tool belt as a metaphor for a person's abilities, because a tool represents what can I do. If I have a certain type of hammer, I can drive a nail. If I have a spatula, I can, flip pancakes or burgers. If I have a batarang and a rope, maybe I can climb the side of a building. But so the tools actually represent what are the capabilities, what I can do. And so I like to think of a tool belt, and that's why I use that metaphor quite a bit, is a tool belt is a collective set of the person's abilities, the things that I can do. So our question when we're looking for technology tools, the first question we need to ask is, what kind of tool belt does a learner need? All right. So the first tool belt when attempting academic tasks, the first tool belt that a student is dealing with is their cognitive tool belt. And as you can see on the slide there, I've just, kind of summarized those abilities that the student has, whether it's speaking or listening, reading and writing, visual spatial processing, planning, organizing, being able to attend to something. That's their initial set of tools. That's their tool belt that they're applying to whatever tasks that they need to do. So if because of the student's learning differences or problems with ADHD or executive functioning, if their current level of performance using that set of tools they have falls significantly short of their desired level of performance, we basically have two ways of closing that performance gap. For those of you who are, teachers, learning specialists, etc., I apologize for vastly simplifying this, but it helps me to make my point. We have two basic ways of closing that performance gap. The first one is instructional intervention. We're going to work with the student, provide them with learning strategies, maybe instructional remediation to improve that internal set of tools that they have, those internal capabilities. The second is referred to as a compensation or a compensatory bypass, where what we're doing is we're working around the issue and we're saying, all right, well, how can we modify or redefine the task? How can we adapt the environment that the student is doing this task? Or how can we improve or otherwise augment the student's internal tool set, those cognitive tools, with external tools? Okay, that's the technology. So when we're looking for technology tools, we're essentially looking to augment the student's internal tool belt, their cognitive tool belt. So the next question that always comes up is, well, what are the right tools for the students? I'll often get, questions like, well, what's the best software for a student who reads slowly? Or, what technology is best for a student who's dysgraphic? Or, what apps would you recommend for a student taking algebra? And obviously the same thing applies for what's the best planner for a student, or what's the best way to help a student focus in class. And I often will frustrate people by giving the answer, well, that depends. And as a way of explaining that, let me rephrase the question for you, okay? So what if I asked you, well, what are the best utensils for preparing a meal? That's essentially the same question. What are the best tools for doing a particular task? So if I asked you that, you would probably have a few questions for me. Your first thought would be, well, what is the meal you want to prepare? Is it a sandwich, or are you making a, 7-course Thanksgiving dinner? Where are you preparing this meal? What resources are available? Are we doing this in a kitchen? Are we doing it around a campfire? And the other one is, what's the existing skill set of the person doing the cooking? Are we talking about, a child, or are we talking about Julia Child? Makes a huge difference. So in order to identify the right tools for a particular job, we need to know who, what, and where. And that leads us to what you're looking at here is a framework which is commonly referred to in my business, in the assistive technology world, as the SET framework: student, environment, task, and tools. And it essentially says that whenever we are trying to figure out what tools are best for to help a person do a particular task, we really need to first understand who is doing that task, and in this case, the student. What are their strengths and weaknesses? What are their preferences, their motivations? Are there other special conditions we need to know? That we need to know. What is the task they need to do? How is that defined in terms of materials, time, how they're going to be assessed on their performance, etc.? And what's the environment or context in which they need to do that task? So that includes the physical environment, but also the social environment. I mean, are they alone? They're doing it together? What's the attitude of other people around them? Is there support available? And in order to identify the right tools, we really need to know who's the student, what's the task, and what's the environment that they're doing this in. And without that information, we really can't get a complete answer. So this SET framework, as you'll see in the note on the bottom of the slide there, was developed, I think it was back in the 1990s, I may be mistaken, by Dr. Joy Zabala. And it's that framework, and it's not a process, keep in mind, it's a framework, has been used, or is used, by schools across the country for collaborative decision making. It's kind of like the best practices model for determining what tools are best for a student. All right. So when we're looking at tools to support specifically learning differences, and that's, keep in mind, that's my, there's all different types of technology, but the type that I deal with is for learning differences, ADHD, and executive function issues. They fall into basically 3 broad categories. The first one is, how can we redefine the task in order to allow the student to leverage their strengths, as opposed to forcing them to use areas where they may be relatively weak? So a good example of that, for instance, would be speech recognition to leverage a student's superior verbal expression, or, audio books. So there I'm maybe leveraging the student's superior auditory comprehension skills as opposed to forcing them to visually read text. And there's several other examples. We'll hit upon a few of these during the second half of this webinar. The second category is to reduce the impact of those particular learning challenges. This is not, like if you look at a spell checker is a perfectly good example. Spell checker in and of itself doesn't, in general, improve a student's ability to spell, but it mitigates the effect of poor spelling so that a student feels more comfortable to actually try to write down on paper what they mean, as opposed to limiting their use of words to just ones they know. So, if you're talking to them, they say, wow, it's really pleasant outside, but when it gets written down, it becomes, it was a nice day. All right. And there's several other examples there as well. The third broad category of how technology helps learning differences in executive functions is to essentially use the technology to either facilitate or enhance sound learning strategies. Now, this is very important when it comes to executive functions. In executive functions, in general, technology does not fix executive function problems. Rather, what you do is you apply a sound strategy, which, probably the school learning specialists are already doing with the kids and students that you're dealing with. And you're taking that strategy and say, how can technology to help me to support that strategy, make it easier for the student to do, make it, allow them to do it a lot better. All right. So those are the three basic categories that we're going to use to try to, help students reach their full potential. All right. So obviously, our first goal with the technology is to make sure that students are equipped with tools so that they're playing on a level academic playing field. We want to make sure that their learning differences don't impede with learning and that they can reach their full potential. But there's actually a secondary reason why we want to use technology, and this is very important for middle schoolers and even more important for high schoolers before they head off to either college, career, or community, is we want to help students build independent learning skills. They're going to be using these for the rest of their lives. So the more that they know how they learn, the more they can advocate for themselves, the better they can look at tasks independently and say, I need this tool in my tool belt to perform that, and I can advocate for myself. So even though we're trying to address student learning needs, we're also trying to teach them these task analysis and tool choice skills that are going to make them very successful problem solvers moving forward. Because as you know, students who have, whether it's dyslexia or ADHD or executive function issues, those are lifelong issues. They're going to become adults with dyslexia, ADHD, and executive functioning issues. So we want to make them independent learners. So, interestingly, a gentleman by the name of Ira David Sokol at he's a doctoral student at Michigan State University, essentially reframed Joy Zabala's SET framework, not to replace it. It does not replace the SET framework, but essentially is a way to apply the SET framework to allow students to be self-determinant. In other words, to help them, it's essentially a strategy to teach them how to analyze tasks and look at, well, what tools will I use for this job? And the first one is, what is the task? What's the academic goal of the task? Like, for instance, reading a book may be the task, but the academic goal is, I need to learn the information in this book. All right. What special factors does the environment introduce? How might the environment and environmental elements, like it's really noisy in here, interfere with my performance in the task? What skills do I bring to performing this task? What abilities can I apply? What limitations or obstacles do I have that might interfere with task completion? And then I can look at what are tools I can use to either leverage a strength or, reduce the impact of a weakness? How can I change the environment? And how can I redefine the task to accomplish the same goal? So this is what I'm going to be looking at. I'm going to use some examples for the remainder of this webinar here and look at various tasks that students may be doing in school through this particular lens and see what tools we can use to address those students' needs. Now, just a caveat here. This is what I like to call the technology iceberg. When I'm giving a 3-hour presentation, I'll essentially tell people we're really just looking at the tip of the iceberg here. We're not looking at all tools available, so just be aware of that. In this extremely short presentation today, we're actually looking at the tip of the iceberg, all right? Pretty much everything I'm talking about and a lot more tools, you can find information on my website, which is off at the side there, techpotential.net. And if you look at the AT toolbox, you'll see a whole mess of different things, including what I'm talking about. And also over in the GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see there are 2 handouts. That and a few other resources are listed under resources and suggested readings. So if you need that website while we're talking here, you can just download that PDF document. Okay, so let's look at some different tasks here. With regard to reading, there's a number of different issues that can interfere with a student's ability to read. It could be, poor decoding skills that affect fluency. It could be visual processing. It could be critical thinking. I'm just going to look at those 3. There's actually several others, but I'm just going to look at those 3 and say, all right, how can I leverage a student's strengths? How can I redefine the task, etc. So a typical student, let's say a student with dyslexia might have poor decoding skills. They might have a weak vocabulary because they don't read that much. And their reading level is well below their listening comprehension level. So what we're going to do is we're going to leverage their relatively better auditory comprehension skills in this case. And our options are human narrated audiobooks. So that's, just listening to a recording of somebody reading a book, or getting the book as digital e-text and using a computer's or tablet's text-to-speech software to read aloud that text. And that gives us a number of other advantages. So let's look at this chart here for a second, comparing what are the pros and cons of audiobooks and e-text. So with an audiobook, as I said, you're listening to a human reader. That has a lot of advantages because you hear the person's inflection, their tone of voice, etc. But the thing is, that's all you're doing. You're just listening to somebody reading. If visually processing the text is an issue, that may not be the right solution. With electronic text, the disadvantage is you're listening to a synthesized voice, and most of them today are actually, if you get the right voice, they're really human sounding. The Siri voice, Cortana's voice on Microsoft, those are all synthesized, but they're nearly human sounding. But the advantage is that we'll actually get to both see and hear the text, and the words can be highlighted as they're read to help with visual tracking and a few other things. And the student can also annotate that e-text, and there's some maybe advantages for that. So choosing the right tool, we first have to look at, well, what does the student need from a skills standpoint? But then also maybe the nature of the task informs the tool. You may want to listen to a novel with a lot of dialogue using an audiobook, but when reading a textbook and reading it for comprehension, maybe we want to use electronic text. All right. So let's look at a few other things. Like, let's say the issue is readability of the text, visual processing. Student might have attention issues. Well, there's a number of different things we can change there. We can adjust all sorts of different aspects of the e-text itself, and we can also help guide the students, both their attention and their visual tracking with various software. So I have a couple of pictures of that here. So for instance, this is on the left here, you see a book that I downloaded from bookshare.org, single-spaced, small font, Times New Roman, it's black text on white. I can take that text and make it far more visually readable, even without text-to-speech, by just splitting it into 2 columns. Makes it easier for the eye to grasp chunks of words at a time. I've added line spacing to it. I've changed the colors. I've even changed the font. That's a so-called dyslexic font that I'm using there. And just by doing that, that can make it a lot easier, even without incorporating text-to-speech. And you can do this on a like an e-reader, like iBooks or on a Kindle. All right. So with regard to visual distractions and such, you can see at the upper right there, that's an app called VoiceStream Reader. And the reason I put that example there is you'll notice that most of the text on the page is grayed out, but the line being read, and specifically the word in that line being read, is being highlighted to help not only keep a student's visual attention, but also keep their cognitive attention while they're reading. And, that can make a huge difference. On the bottom, we're looking at so-called screen masking, where I'm kind of fading out certain aspects of in this case, a web page, and I'm just focusing in on a certain line. So there's various tools that will do that. So if that is the issue you're dealing with, these would be good tools, but they may not be appropriate tools if this isn't a particular issue. All right, so let's go on to another one. What about critical thinking and retention? So the standard strategy that one might use with that, if you were using a print book, is to mark up the book. You may use, in a print book, use colored highlighters, sticky notes on the side of the page. What can we do in the digital world that can help with that? So there's various e-text reading programs, so-called literacy and learning software, which bundles together a number of different reading, writing, and learning supports into one package. The example I'm showing there is Kurzweil 3000, which has a number of tools, and that, Read and Write Gold, Solo, Clara Read, and again, you can find all these things I'm mentioning in the AT Toolbox on my website. But what you're seeing on the left is digital text that I have used digital highlighters to mark up the text according to a particular strategy. Headings are in yellow, important lines are in green, vocabulary words circled in red. But because I'm working in the digital world, it gives me the advantage of being able to say, why not just extract all those highlights and annotations to a separate document? That's what you see on the right. And that becomes a study guide. All right, so for a student who has, critical thinking, reasoning, maybe working memory skills while reading a story, a tool like this could be very helpful. All right, so now let's go on to writing and composition. One of the big issues here is with regard to writing organization, and providing the student with a framework for that organization is a standard way of doing that. A graphic organizer, which could be on paper, that organizes, okay, here's your first paragraph, here's the body text, here's your concluding paragraph, etc. Well, when we use software, we have the advantage of being able to portray that organizational structure in very different ways. So here is an example of, I'm using the software Inspiration, and here's a framework for a book report, which I've displayed. What you're looking at there is exactly the same information, but shown in 3 completely different ways. The first one is a typical textual outline. The second one is a diagram. The third one is a branched map. Okay, depending on the student's learning skills, you're going to want to use one or more of these particular things. And the nice thing is, I could outline my topic with a branched map, but then just by pushing a button, turn it into an outline, which is what I have to turn into the teacher. All right, so let's go on to, and I realize we're at, I'm in California, so it's 10:28 here. On the East Coast, it would be 1:28. So I'm going to have to speed through some of these here, and then we'll get to our questions. So with regard to spelling and grammar, there's a number of different interesting tools out there. One of them is called a contextual spell checker. And again, this isn't going to make a student a better speller, but it may give them confidence to use words that are in their verbal vocabulary as opposed to their to their writing vocabulary, so to speak. In this case, what it's doing is, you have to be online to use this, it's analyzing the words in the sentence in the context of the sentence itself. So you can see on the bottom there, I have a horribly misspelled sentence. If I could spell better, I would be able to express myself to more people, or express myself more. And if a human being reads that, they would pretty much know, yeah, I think I know what the student is trying to say. Well, the software can actually analyze that sentence and provide a much better rendition of what the student is trying to say, which gives them more independent confidence to move forward. Word prediction software. This can also, I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm just going to allow you to read that slide because you have a handout. And most people are kind of familiar with word prediction. So we'll just move on here to, let's see, we have paper worksheets. So this is kind of the bane of existence for a lot of students, especially those who have illegible handwriting or other motor coordination issues. How do I respond to a paper worksheet? One of the easiest workarounds is redefine the task. Don't respond to a paper. Don't handwrite on a paper worksheet. Use PDF annotation software to type on a PDF copy of the worksheet. That obviously requires that the that the worksheet be available as a PDF document. And there's a number of different tools. That toolbar you see at the bottom is for the Adobe's new Acrobat Reader DC, and there's a number of different comment tools that allow me to to annotate directly on, or type directly on the worksheet to respond to it. With regard to class note-taking, note-taking is often very difficult because the student has difficulty for any of a number of reasons, both writing and listening at the same time. So what we want to do here is we want to reduce the amount of information to be copied. Easiest way to do that, take a picture of stuff. Don't copy down stuff on the board, take a picture of it. Or have the teacher do a screenshot of the electronic whiteboard and dispense it to the entire class. The other thing is there's a lot of software that is now available, such as the LiveScribe Smart Pen, that will record audio and link it to either handwritten or typed notes. And this provides us with some really interesting strategies, because what we can do then is to say, it's like deferred auditory processing. If I'm missing something, I just mark that section in the notes and say, I'll go back and listen to that specific spot later. And then I can touch that spot in my notes. Maybe I put a star down and, pick up the audio recording at exactly that point and add my notes later. So it's kind of like deferred auditory recording. And I have a strategy in here that you can read later with regard to that. So moving into attention and organization and planning, with regard to attention, the first thing is to identify what's the source of the distraction. That's very important, because otherwise you don't know what you're trying to reduce the student's response to. Is it visual, auditory? Is it internal distractions? So there's a number of different things that we can use there. The little picture on the right here is showing a computer utility that masks everything but just a single window on the computer screen. There are also utilities that will block, for a limited amount of time, block access to distracting websites and apps. I know several of you are probably interested in that. You can see that on my website on the AT Toolbox. The two that you're specifically going to want to look at are self-control for the Mac and cold turkey for PC, soon to be available for the Mac. And there's a number of other tools. Many of you are probably familiar with, the more we incorporate, the more students can incorporate physical movement, that actually helps them to regulate their attention. So there's a number of tools for that. So with regard to organization, I have several different strategies on this page, but I want to show you specifically one tool here. So digital notebook. So Microsoft OneNote, this is an example of a digital notebook. I often use this. I'm going to go back a slide here, actually. Hold on. I often use this, I'm referring to the bottom of the page, as a digital knowledge bank. So in other words, as a student collects different learning they're going to apply in the future, whether it's order of math operations or top 5 grammar rules or whatever, or how to write a persuasive essay, to collect it in a digital notebook as an easy to refer to cumulative knowledge portfolio. OneNote is really good because it kind of looks like a paper binder. It's got tabs on the top. It can also record audio. It has a number of different features. I would suggest looking into that for organizing information. All right, with regard to, let me move back a page here. So only a couple more slides and then we're done, and then we can go on to the questions. With regard to sense of time, a lot of students have an issue with time as being just an abstract concept. There are only 2 times, now and not now. All right, and if the paper is due not now, then I don't have to worry about it, right? So the trick here is to use technology to make time real by representing it in a way that the student can grasp. So for instance, visual task timers. I'm looking at a thing called Task Timer over on the left there. Computer parental controls are surprisingly good at helping a student become more aware of time because the computer goes off at a certain time and you can't use it. You learn very quickly how much time is passing. There's a website and client that goes along with it called Rescue Time that will give an objective evaluation of how a student is using websites and apps so that they can make good decisions. Because again, the goal here is not to impose limits, but to teach them how to build their own executive function skills so that they can make better use of time. And then finally, with time planning and time management, that actually is a really complex issue to address, mainly because there are so many different parts involved. As you can see on the time there, to effectively plan and manage your time, there's a lot of different executive functions that are involved. So the main strategy is to apply a structure, for a single structure for a student to capture information, such as a task management app, and to also make sure that tasks and projects are broken up into parts. So you might use, and I use Inspiration actually quite successfully with students to help them think on screen and break big projects down into individual parts, and then keep track of what they're doing in a time management app. This is just one example I have here called Wunderlist. I kind of like it. I have my classes on the left, tasks are in the middle, and then details on a specific task are on the right, which includes a checklist of different items, which I really like, and then a notes section where students can copy stuff from, let's say, the school's website. So I will leave it at that, and we can go to the questions.
Great. That's, what's pretty amazing about everything that you talked about is how much is out there to help students. It's pretty extraordinary.
It's also kind of really difficult to cram that into half an hour.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, nice job. I mean, I think what we took away from what you just said is that this is a serious task to figure out what your child needs and to get your child the help that they need. And I guess I would just jump right to a question that many people have asked is, how do people find people like yourself if they're not in San Francisco? Because, clearly this is something that's serious for parents. They can't, it's hard for parents to do the kind of assessment of their child that you're describing, I think. In your experience, can parents effectively do that on their own?
You can get some tips almost from stuff like this to move forward on that. But to be honest, I have found it's actually been really surprising, specifically with regard to learning differences. And I'll just put that broad folder on it. specialists who work with learning differences. I mean, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area here. It's like, it's like 10 million people. I've actually done work in the LA area where there's like 15 million people. And there are surprisingly few people who focus on technology for learning differences.
I think that's true, yeah.
And so with regard to finding, rather than, I'm going to give you a very interesting solution here. So I want people to go to the website quiet.org, which is QIAT.org, which stands for Quality Indicators for Assistive Technology. This is a group that was, which I'm a member of, which was created back in, I don't know if it was back in the 90s or what, but it's a bunch of the core group that started this are AT specialists. And if any of you are listening out there, I apologize if I'm misdescribing this, but essentially looking at how do we effectively implement technology for students. That's the main issue. That's where the quality indicators part comes in. All right. So they have a listserv, all right, and there's probably close to 4,000 people on the listserv now. It is one of the most active, helpful listservs on assistive technology I have ever been part of. So I'm going to suggest...
Shelley, can you spell that out again? I just want to...
It's QIAT.org.
Okay.
Quality Indicators for Assistive Technology.org. And I would say join the listserv. Lurk for a while to see the sorts of questions that are coming up. And this is not just all AT specialists. The majority of people are parents, teachers, etc. And I have to say about half of my professional development as a AT specialist comes from stuff that I see on that listserv.
Wow.
There is so much good conversation. So in an effort to just answer that question quickly, I would say look there, and then maybe post a question saying, do you know of a learning specialist in the such and such area?
Right, because these are people who by definition are interested in technology supports.
Exactly. Right.
What's your experience with the schools? I mean, many people have posted questions along the lines of, how can I have my school have this kind of ability to figure out the right technology for my child? I mean, do you have any suggestions on that?
Well, I think
what's your experience with schools?
Yeah, the idea of actually implementing a strategy. Of course, I'm dealing with just the technology part of this, and technology is just one of several interventions. You do realize that.
Sure.
So, but just with regard to the technology, is for the school to have a specific plan for how they address technology. I mean, like I referred to the SET framework before. That's a good starting place. To say, all right, how do we answer questions about this? Who do we fold into the decision-making process? Again, I'll direct schools specifically, if you're working for a school, direct them to the quiet.org website for resources on that. This is not the listserv part of it, but just other resources on the Quiet site as a good place to start. But you have to have a specific plan for how you address this. Some schools are really good about it. Other schools, private or public, unfortunately have essentially the person who knows the most about technology, which might be, let's say, a speech-language pathologist, is told, "Hi, you just volunteered to be our AT specialist for the district," and that person might be an expert in like communication, augmentative communication technology, but not necessarily with other areas. But I think the first thing is to look at. To really understand, maybe this is actually the precursor, to really understand what technology can do for students. Okay, and to really look at that and go, wow, that could really help. The other thing is for schools to implement, or to at least consider looking at implementing universal design for learning principles, all right? Let's see, I'm trying to think of probably your best website to go to for that would be cast.org, cast.org. And that's kind of like UDL Central, and you'll see other websites that link off from that, like I think it's aem.org for accessible educational materials. So there are a number of different resources out there to look at how technology can help. So I think the first thing is to really have a sense of awareness of what is actually possible, and then you can go about asking the right questions. So
that's really exactly, because I think this is just such an eye-opener, just hearing the kinds of things that you're saying. People don't, it's very hard to know to even approach this. So can we just go back to one specific issue, which is probably the most common one posted in terms of questions, and that is note-taking. Lots of people have posted that they're really concerned about their child's ability to take notes. Some have specifically said things like slow language processing, attentiveness, various reasons. But can you recap? You did do a quick run through a very interesting slide on
very, very quick.
I know. Can you recap sort of what are the key issues with note-taking and the solution? I think it's a big one for
it is. I guess the first thing I would do is to broaden the definition of note-taking as knowledge management. Note-taking is actually what you mean when you say note-taking is capturing information that I'm going to use later, whether I'm going to refer to it to study, I need it for reference, I'm going to reapply it in a report, whatever. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is to say note-taking is actually the first step of a broader issue called knowledge management. And knowledge management means I need to capture information that is relevant to me. I need to keep that information organized in some way. I need to be able to quickly retrieve the information I need, and I need to be able to employ or put to use that information, whether it's to study or put it in my report. So if you're clever and we're looking at the initials there, capture, organize, retrieve, and employ, that's the core of a good knowledge management system. All right. So when you're looking at note-taking, it's not just looking at the act of taking the notes, but also looking at the larger issue of how are those notes going to be used. All right. And this gets down into looking at, okay, what are the issues that are obstacles for the student to be able to capture the notes, for them to be able to use the notes, for them to be able to find the notes, etc. The capturing is obviously a big part. So that is, I'm going to give that answer, it depends. It depends on what's getting in the way. So let's take a few examples. Dysgraphia obviously will get in the way if the way you're intending to take notes is to write stuff down. In a way, this is kind of an inefficient way to take notes because it requires you to listen or see the information, to then process it, and then render it either by typing or handwriting. So this is a big, long process this stuff has to go through. So different types of information you may want to capture in different ways. My first step, and I did mention this on that the one single slide I had on that, is to say what's the nature of the information being captured. If it's an assignment written on the board, don't copy it. Take a picture of it. If it's stuff that is the teacher's using an electronic whiteboard, maybe the accommodation needs to be, capture a picture of that. If the teacher is putting slides on the board, the best way around that might be to give the student advance copy of those slides, or maybe give it at the time, and have them merely annotate as opposed to having to spend time just rescribing whatever is written on the board. Okay, so there's various strategies we can use for that. The other one, which I alluded to, is deferred auditory processing. Since a lot of the knowledge that gets transferred during a lecture is auditory, all right, the old in one ear and out the other. So in other words, if I don't either remember what the teacher said, or if I don't render that as typed or handwritten text, it's lost. Okay.
Right.
And if the student has slow processing speed, can't write quickly enough, slow auditory processing, it would be really helpful to listen to that again. Well, yeah, sure, you could audio record it, but then you have to find, that's great for capturing it, but then how do I find what I need? That's where you end up with, and I said I alluded to that on the one slide, a new kind of group of technologies that allow you to record, but then also link those recording to your notes, whether they're handwritten or they're typed. So if you're doing handwriting, the LiveScribe Smart Pen is a great way to do that. If you're typing, you might want to use, the Notability app on an iPad or a Microsoft OneNote on either a Mac or a PC.
What did you say, Notability?
Yeah, Notability is probably the most popular note-taking app in school. Sometimes it's part of the standard tool set for kids in one-to-one iPad schools. And Notability will audio record, but like the LiveScribe pen, it links the audio recording to whatever notes you're taking. So if you look at, for those of you who are listening, go back to that note-taking strategy slide I had there. And the idea is to figure out in advance, what are those places I'm going to want to go back to? Like if the teacher says, okay, here's your assignment for tomorrow, that ought to be a red flag. I need to mark that in my notes. Maybe it's just an A with a circle around it. Now, when I touch my LiveScribe pen to that A, or in Notability, I touch that A that I typed, it's going to take me to exactly that place in the audio recording, and I can listen to the teacher, talk about my assignment or something like that. So you need to have a technology, but you also need to have a strategy for using that technology. A LiveScribe pen in and of itself probably isn't going to solve note-taking problems. So I guess my advice would be look at all aspects of the note-taking process, not just the taking of the notes in class, but also how they're being used. And then also look at what's the specific obstacle. Is it writing? Is it listening? Is it organization? And you need to address that specific issue. Different tools for different.
Yeah, interesting. I have a daughter who has ADHD and also impaired receptive language. And so here's what she did, and tell me if you think this made sense. Okay. She took her laptop to all her classes. This is in college at a pretty demanding and very, in retrospect, perhaps too verbally oriented a school. And she just typed everything that was said as fast as she could. So she, A, stayed focused, and B, got everything. But I guess from what you're saying is she then had the challenge of having pages and pages and pages of notes that she had to deal with, right? Yeah.
Well, she might benefit from, and this is technology notwithstanding, just benefit from good note-taking strategies. In other words, how do you take abbreviated telegraphic notes? First of all,
that was beyond her. Really.
Also, Yeah. Also, a lot of times when what happens is students get in this trap, and your daughter may be in this trap of. So I have this information coming at me, and what they're doing is they're bypassing the comprehension part of their brain, and they're just, I'm just scribing everything the student says. So you've actually missed the class, is what happens. So the idea is, if her strength here, if her strength is, auditory comprehension, even if it's slow, if her strength is, I need to learn by listening, I would want to do as much as possible to minimize the amount of writing and have her focus on the listening aspect. And depending on the nature of the, the information she has to take notes on is, don't scribe stuff down. That one of the accommodations should be, I get a copy of certain things, or what is used in college also is have a peer note taker. That when I headed up assistive technology at Stanford for about 8 years, so I got to work with a lot of really talented kids who were dealing with some really difficult issues, and so a peer note taker is a common.
That's a really great idea.
Yeah,
because I think she felt that she couldn't. Yeah. She couldn't comprehend it all. There was no way. So the only thing she could do is write it all down and then go back and figure it out later.
Yeah, but that becomes a waste of time for her because now she gets to listen to the class twice. But what I was getting at is to have the peer note taker. She can take her own notes, but then also as a backup have a peer note taker, and the peer note taker uses the technology, whether it's a LiveScribe pen or Notability or whatever, and then sends her, however the school works out that system, sends her the files. But now, because you've linked audio to the notes, if she looks at that student peer note taker's notes and says, oh, yeah, what was the teacher talking about at this point, can touch that note and then listen to what was going on at that point. So again, it's a combination of tool plus strategy. It's very important.
Right. Yeah, it seems to me that in her case, at least, the strategy was the harder part than the tool. Interestingly, yeah. I mean, I think she, and in any event, enough about her, but definitely note-taking and auditory processing are huge issues for many of Attitude's.
It is. I often say, like during my presentations, that is one of the most difficult. If you think of all the different cognitive processes that are going on when you're taking notes, that is one of the most challenging situations that anybody, student or adult, is going to run into.
Completely. So, both the attention plus the handwriting plus the making sense of the words. I mean, it's and when you're dealing with a complex topic in college, that's a tough one.
Yeah. The other thing also is to preload the information. So the more that, for instance, the more that I know about what is going to be covered during that class, like maybe given a note-taking outline, let's say in middle school or high school.
Yes.
If I'm given a note-taking outline, now I don't have to spend as much of my cognitive energies trying to set up an organizational structure for this in my head.
So much agree with that. My daughter's language therapist in middle school advised her, I was shocked at first, to read Spark Notes about a book before she read the book, because going into the book reading, she already knew what to look for, what the plot was.
That sets up an organizational structure, and having a note-taking template does the same thing. I already know what I'm going to be writing down. I just don't know what the particular facts are. So.
And so, I think pre-reading the textbook before the lecture, all of those things serve the same purpose. So, unfortunately, this is so interesting. We're almost out of time, and I know you had a few final thoughts you wanted to say, and we're eager for every bit of your of your AFS. There's a person here who said, by the way, that they love this and they want to adopt you. So,
okay. Well,
so we'd love to hear your thoughts.
One thing. All right. So this is leading into my final thought here. But before I get to this particular slide, if anybody does want to contact me, the last slide actually does have my contact information. Feel free to, shoot me a question. Just don't expect an immediate response. Let me just make that
That's so kind of you. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, at the moment, I get like 40 or 50 response-worthy emails a day, and
my goodness,
that becomes my executive function problem. So, anyway, my final thought is when we talk about technology, we often focus on the tangible part of technology, which is the tools. Like you'll go to a school and it's like, when the stimulus funds were available back in 2009 and 10 to get the economy going again, it's like, wow, we can use this money and we can buy technology. Well, that's the tangible part of technology, but there's an intangible part that's just as important. And if you look at any definition of technology by the government, if you look at the ADA, IDEA, or whatever, you'll see they define technology as having two parts, devices and services. My main point is that if you don't have the services, you may not be able to use the device. It won't be useful to you. So services, assistive technology services, might be things like the AT assessment process. How do I even know what's the right tool in the first place? Skills training, both for the student and for those working around them. It could be the parent, it could be the teacher's aide, whatever, which essentially is how do I operate it? Learning strategies, and this is different from skills training. This is how do I apply it. It's one thing to know how to use the inspiration program. It's quite another thing to know how do I make use of inspiration to become a better writer or learner or whatever, okay? Then there's evaluating, which is actually part of the assessment process, evaluating is this actually helping or not? And if it isn't, we need to look at why. Maybe the student didn't receive enough training. Hopefully it's not because it's the wrong tool. Maybe the technology isn't configured properly. But we need to evaluate. We can't just set and forget and say, okay, you've got your technology, you're all set.
Right.
We need to provide technical support, and then we need to have an implementation plan to put all this together. I can say from my 28 years working in technology, assistive technology, that when I'd say 99% of the time when the technology doesn't work, when it doesn't provide desired outcomes, it's because one of these pieces is missing. All right?
That makes so much sense. The technology by itself is not the solution.
Yes.
Right.
So when you talk about it, when you put stuff in IEPs, you need to consider its devices, which is software and things and other stuff like that, but also what are the services, all right? So essentially, equipped with the right tools, students can much more easily demonstrate their potential. That's actually why I refer to my business as technology to unlock potential. That's what we're trying to do, all right? And I have resources, as I said, on the website. And I think that wraps us up, doesn't it?
Shelley, this was really a great webinar. And unfortunately, it just, as someone said, we needed 60 minutes of Shelley talking and then 30 minutes of questions. But so I hope you'll consider coming back again for round 2, because I think we, as you said, barely hit the tip of the iceberg, and people are typing in. Very, very good. Thank you. Fully agree. So forth. So thank you so much. Very, very helpful, I think, and very inspirational for everyone with kids with learning differences. So again, Shelley, thank you so much.
All right. You're quite welcome. Everybody else, have a great day. Bye.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.